Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome Josie Van Londen. She's a retired medical oncologist and geriatrician, and Gerald Vockley. He is the Chief of Genetic and Genomic Medicine at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. Today's Kevin MD article is FDA delays could end vital treatment for rare disease patients. Josie and Jerry, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
Thank you.
All right. So before we jump into the article, I'm just going to ask each of you just to share a brief story and journey to where you are today. Josie, why don't you go first?
Thank you for having us, Dr. Poe. I am a medically retired medical oncologist because I'm now living with a primary mitochondrial myopathy. And as such, I have invited Dr. Vockley to join us to help me out if and when I should tire. Dr. Vockley is my own doctor at the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. He diagnosed me, and for the first time in history, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Vockley, but he was able to offer me the first experimental treatment for my disease, primary mitochondrial myopathy. Dr. Vockley, I'm going to give it to you.
All right. Josie's correct. I was able to start her on an experimental drug. There's a clinical trial going on for primary mitochondrial myopathies. One of which she has. It's a group of disorders, not a single disease, and it's been approved for one of those disorders, but not the one that she has. And so I was able to work with the company to help get her on that drug because she was not really in a condition to participate in the clinical trial. I can tell you that doing things like that, having therapies available for rare diseases is just a culmination of everything, all of the forces in modern medicine and science that have come together now closer to the end of my career, doing things that I could only have dreamed of when I got started. I've been doing this for 40 plus years, and we've moved from just figuring out what the diseases were to trying to understand the effects on cells and bodies, and now actually developing and using drugs to treat more and more of them.
All right. So the Kevin MD article that we're talking about today is titled FDA Delays Could End Vital Treatment for Rare Disease Patients. Josie, for those who didn't get a chance to read that article yet, tell us what it's about.
Basically, the article is about experimental medication that Dr. Vockley started me on called elimipritide, which I am getting through expanded access for my indication, primary mitochondrial myopathy, but it was in the process of being approved for Barth syndrome. The idea was that if it would have been denied for Barth syndrome, that the stealth company who makes elimipritide would go under, and everybody who's on expanded access for different indications would lose it, which is why there was a huge advocacy effort for everybody concerned about this to try to raise awareness about the fact that Barth syndrome is an ultra rare disease, and therefore elimipritide for Barth syndrome was awarded the Orphan Drug Act status. And the Orphan Drug Act status, probably Dr. Vockley can explain it better than I do, but there's many parts of that. But one part of that is that the FDA can review data of effectiveness beyond randomized controlled trials. And this medication has been found to be helping in a very meaningful way for many individuals. And now I'm going to give it to Dr. Vockley. So that's why I wrote the article to explain the concept of the Orphan Drug Act, which I wanted to raise awareness for. Thank you.
All right. So before I turn it on to Dr. Vockley, let me ask you, Josie, elimipritide, tell me the effect that medicine has on your daily life. How does that medicine affect you?
It's a daily injection in my belly subcutaneously. At that point, when I started taking it, I was unable to turn around in bed. I was heavily dependent on my husband for activities of daily living. But since I started taking this injection, and everybody responds differently, my response was a little slow, and my response is not as drastic as Dr. Vockley has seen it in other people. But I have now been able to regain my independence for most of my activities of daily living. So I can stay home alone, and my husband can go to work. And I was able to read a little bit again, and I was able to craft a little bit again to get some quality of life back, which I hadn't realized I had lost until I regained it. And so for me personally, it has had a very drastic effect, but Dr. Vockley can probably share his experience with other patients.
All right. So, Jerry, tell me about elimipritide and some of the obstacles that you're facing in terms of getting it approved for rare diseases like the one Josie has.
Yeah, it probably would help to just back up a second and do an overview of what's going on here, and then come back to Josie's case, because it's illustrative of the field in general. So rare diseases individually are rare. There are 10,000 of them, and there may be a handful of patients. There may be 1,000 patients, but in general, these are things that most physicians aren't going to see, and most pharmaceutical companies aren't going to want to try to take on developing a drug for, because the market is small. There's no financial incentive. So there is federal legislation that helps get those kinds of drugs to market. Although they're individually rare, together they're common. 3 to 5% of babies born in this country have one of these diseases, and they might not show up right away. Sometimes they're actually adult onset conditions, but they're responsible for 40% of infant mortality. They're responsible for half of pediatric hospitalizations in tertiary care medical centers. So they're a big impact on the health system. The process for getting one of these drugs approved is a little different than something for a common indication, heart disease or diabetes or something like that. And part of that is due to something called the Orphan Disease or the Orphan Products Act that has been passed to give the FDA flexibility in deciding how a drug can move forward. The ultimate goal is to provide something that is shown to be safe and effective. The definition of that is often in question, though. There's a standard that has been a long-standing one in the drug development field called the double-blind placebo-controlled trial. Neither you nor I know whether you're getting the real drug or essentially a sugar pill. And nobody knows that until the end of the trial, when you unblind it and you do all your statistics and say, okay, patients who got the drug did a little better than patients who didn't. The problem is when you have a small population, when you're doing clinical trials with 10 or 20 or 30 patients, that's not a workable approach. And so the FDA has the ability to modify that. All the law says is that a drug needs to be documented to be safe and effective. It doesn't say that it has to have a particular approach. And there are approaches for proving efficacy in clinical trials for rare diseases that don't require that the standard double-blind placebo can be a 3 or 4 year kind of study. It doesn't mean the FDA is lowering standards. They're using alternative statistical methods that have proven to be valid for rare disease. And unfortunately, this comes down from the top, and when you get into the trenches, the folks who are implementing that at the FDA sometimes seem to forget that, and so they come back and they say, we haven't done this, you haven't done that, we don't like your control, and they keep falling back into old habits, and that's a problem in general. For elimipritide specifically, the first review of the drug by an expert panel that was assembled by the FDA to assess the clinical trial voted overwhelmingly to recommend it, saying that they had proven efficacy. For whatever reason, the FDA then elected not to approve it and said, sorry, you have to repeat it. Well, there were, I don't know, 40 patients in that trial. They were all of the patients in the United States, very near anyway. And to repeat it was essentially impossible. So this was a death sentence for those patients.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have your drug. Fortunately, the company that makes this drug was persistent and very savvy and continued to work with the FDA on it. And ultimately, the FDA did another deep dive on the data and said, okay, we're going to approve it for Barth syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
Now, remember, Josie doesn't have Barth syndrome. She has mitochondrial myopathy. They've looked at the mitochondrial myopathy data and has said, well, it looks like it's working for a bunch of these patients, but it didn't work for these patients. So you have to do the whole study over again. Josie has one of the diseases where it worked, but at this point, we're still on compassionate use, and the company's been very, very good about continuing to make that available to patients like Josie. And so, either they have the bandwidth, and what I mean is the money to redo that study, or they don't. We'll
Mm-hmm.
find out as the days go on. But it's an example of the FDA either not following their own rules and regulations or changing them over the course of a study. And of course, if you change the rules, you can never win the game. And it's not I'm hoping that with more and more examples like this, where it's clear that the process backfired and they fixed it, that we'll get to the point where it doesn't backfire in the first place.
Jerry, what does it mean that for patients like Josie, for the medicine to be used for compassionate use, is approved for one disease which Josie doesn't have, and the company can still produce it because it is approved for that one disease? So what does it mean for patients like Josie where it continues to benefit her, but it's not specifically approved for her disease?
Well, it means that her insurance company won't pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I were to go to them and say, I want to prescribe this, one of the benefits of having an approved drug is, as a physician, you can prescribe it for anything. It doesn't have to be the approved indication, but the insurance companies don't have to pay for it if it's not approved for that condition. And for most of these rare disease drugs, they're relatively expensive. It's a lot of investment, and it ends up only getting into a very small number of patients. And so the companies have to charge enough money to get their investment back. Otherwise, there's no investors, and there are no more future drugs. So that's the difference with a compassionate use protocol. What you can do is go to a company and say, I'm convinced your drug will work in this patient, and you write them a protocol that explains why, and then they either say, great, we agree with you, we're going to provide you that drug at no cost, and let you treat your patient. So that's what's going on here.
And quickly, Jerry, in terms of cost, when you say it's expensive, just give us a ballpark range of the dollars we're talking about.
So we don't know what elimipritide is going to cost in Barth syndrome. Most of these rare disease drugs hit 6 figures, and some of them hit 7 figures.
In a yearly basis?
On a yearly basis.
Josie, so where are we with elimipritide? And if the FDA doesn't approve it, and for your particular condition, and it has to be continued to be given to you on compassionate use basis, tell us what that potentially could mean to you and the impact it has on your life.
Well, I continue to be hopeful that the company will continue to provide me elimipritide through expanded access, which they have promised they will. If they stop doing that for some reason, then my medicine will be put on hold. Dr. Vockley and I are concerned that my decline will go faster. I had to put it on hold for a week a little while ago for reasons that are not relevant, but I already noticed a decline in that 1 week. Beating the medicine, it by personal experience only works when you take it. Now, there are other medications in the pipeline, not necessarily for my particular condition. I don't know how in detail you want to go, but maybe Dr. Vockley can make a comment on that. And overall, the field is having a huge moment right now.
Mm-hmm. So, Josie, let me follow up. Are you in contact with other rare disease patients as it relates to that specific drug? Tell me what kind of advocacy efforts that you are pursuing in order to hopefully get the FDA to perhaps change its mind.
Uh, yes, for Bart syndrome, I was part of a big advocacy effort through the Bart Syndrome Foundation. At the moment, I'm part of different advocacy efforts that are merging together by the UMDF.
That's the United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation, which is the one of the relative patient advocacy groups that deals with these diseases.
As well as Mito Action
Hmm.
and the POLG Foundation. And there's some smaller ones, but yes, there's a big effort, research-wise, advocacy-wise, patient support-wise, that these organizations do, and they're collaborating more and more to synergize, which I find very heartening to see. I wanted to, in terms of another question that you're probably going to ask, and then I'm going to give Dr. Vockley the final word, is
Hmm.
what are your clinical take-home messages is one question you were going to ask it. I wanted to tell you four things that are very important to me. Yes, these are rare diseases, but somebody has to fit in these small percentages.
Hmm.
So don't automatically write it off. Next take-home message is you're never too old to have a rare slash genetic disease because it's a spectrum. Everybody gets diagnosed at a different age with different symptoms. They progress differently. And so that makes it hard to do research on it, but not impossible. And my last take home message is there is hope. There is a huge momentum in the scientific community, which I find very encouraging to see. And I want to thank everybody in my private life, but also in my advocacy family and my provider family. And Dr. Vockley has sort of become my extended family member, and he knows that. And that is really good that you do this, Dr. Poe, that you raise awareness for this. Thank you for letting us talk.
And Jerry, I'm going to give you the last word. Just why don't you leave us with some take-home messages that you want to share with my audience?
Hard to top that. I will also point out or finish with the thought that I had earlier, which is that rare diseases are individually rare, but together are common. And if something's going on with you that you or your care providers don't understand, think about them and get yourself referred to someone who can investigate for one of these rare diseases. The technology for identification and of these diseases and the development of new drugs for them has increased exponentially. You know, it's a thousandfold higher than it was 10 years ago. And this is really a moment that the field has to continue to push for better therapies and earlier identification of patients who have these diseases. And hopefully what that means is you know, earlier identification, earlier therapy, better life, longer life.
Well, thank you both for sharing your stories, time, and insight. Thanks again for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having us.